We're back with Jim Knowles for the Oral History Project of the Eastham Historical Society. We are still at his childhood home in South Eastham, and the date is October 26th, 2023. The interviewers are Rick Lindholm and myself, Marca Daley. So, Jim, you're going to continue with
Yes, let me tell you a little bit
post-war.
more about the war years and what it was like, because technology is not what it is today.
Right.
During those days, we didn't have a refrigerator, we had an ice box. And the iceman came, didn't have to be home, he would come in, check, see what you needed, put it in and leave. In the summer, we used the ice box. In the winter, we had a box on the kitchen window that we set things in. So when you woke up in the morning, there was the milk coming out of the bottle with all that frozen cream on top. We got our milk delivered from Charlie Gunn's dairy farm, which is now down at Fort Hill, part of the park. And he would simply come in the house, check, see how many bottles you had, how many empties, resupply it and leave. The thought of locking a door never dawned on anybody. Of course, later we moved on to refrigerators so you could keep things, and now you could have frozen food. Prior to that, the stores didn't carry frozen food because people didn't have refrigerators until that time. That meant when we caught fish, we could freeze the fish and have it for the winter, because we caught lots of flounder, throughout the whole fall every year, and had that available to us. The other technology was telephones. We had one phone, but it was a party line. It was, 2774 was the number, J, and then 274R, and W. And that stood for James Knowles, Ralph Ormsby, and Win Schofield. We were all on the same party line. So when you picked up the phone, the first thing you did was listen. You said when he was talking, if so, you hung up. But if not, the operator would come on the line. And you'd usually say hello to him and talk, and then tell him who you wanted to speak with. You didn't necessarily give him a number. He knew the numbers. But if you were calling off Cape, you'd have to give him all the details, and they would place a call. During the daytime, they had multiple operators working on the line. Often some of the kids from high school working in the afternoon, people we knew. So not all calls were really private. But when you did call, Hollis Eldridge was on at night. Hollis worked at the funeral home during the day and slept in the telephone office at night. And if a call came in, it rang a buzzer and he would patch it through. So I remember being off Cape, calling, and my uncle had been killed in an auto crash, and I called home to talk to my folks. I called, and after doing all the routing you had to do to get to Orleans, Hollis answered, said, "Hollis, it's Jimmy Knowles, I want to talk to folks." He says, well, they're not home, they're down at the farm, I'll ring you down there. So we had call forwarding automatically. And we had call messaging, and that if we went away, when our phone rang, our two rings showed up in some other house, they would pick it up and say, "Hi, Dottie's not here, they'll be back this afternoon or something," and then hang up. And also led to conference calling, because at one time, Dot Osby, her husband was the Coast Guard, that was stationed over in Nantucket. The women here would want to talk to her, so one would place a call and all the others would pick up the line and they'd have a conference call going on. All before it became possible in the telephone company that I ultimately went to work for. But of course, you started off with talking to the operator, and then they finally went to dial, and then to touchtone. And all those things gave you different things. But you still had stationary phones.
Who was the operator? Where was the operator?
The operator was in Orleans.
That same
In
building
a
there?
brick building,
Yeah.
not the same one now.
Oh.
No, that's an equipment building. That was not there then. That's when they put all the switching equipment went in there.
Okay.
Before, it was just a switching board down on Main Street. I think there's a wine store there now.
Mm-hmm.
But I was going to say, we also had the communication for the fire department. They didn't have radios, didn't have portable telephones, so we had the whistle, in the center of town, the siren, and it would go off, and it would send out a signal, and everybody in town would know, well, 2 blasts means it's in southeast Eastham, and 4 means it's someplace else. And then the guys that were carpenters would drop their work, and they'd drive in the direction of the section that it indicated, and someplace along the way, somebody would wave them down, and they would get to the fire. So that was what it was like in the 50s, before they finally got the 60s and got some handheld radios that they actually send out signals on before we had at that time. So technology did play a part in things. Going through school, one of the things that happened along the way was the tricentenary. This was in 1951, the 300-year anniversary. I guess Ralph Chase was selectman then, Morris Wiley was involved. And we brought the mayor of the town of Eastham, over by London, over. And he came with all of his furry decorations, as the British would have. And I remember we had a parade, but the thing that stuck out in my mind was we had a clam bake down in what's now the town hall parking lot. They dug a big pit, and they had picnic tables set up. And the pit, they got some rocks, the fire going down below, then seaweed, then lobster, then corn, and it was a major feast. And that impressed me. The rest of it was 300 years of things.
Well, you were 10 years old.
Yes, at that point. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just turned 10. Yeah. I mean, going back in history, I don't think I have it around here now, but somewhere we have a box full of arrowheads, things like that were collected from this property around here. Wow. Tomahawk heads, all evidence of the Indians having been here for many years. Went on to school, and finally moved up to Orleans to school. Many more rooms, many more teachers, but a good education. What we did, the major thing we did up there was being involved in scouting. We had the Cub Scouts early and then the Boy Scouts, but Sea Scouts was a big deal. Almost every boy in the school belonged to Sea Scouts, and the girls belonged to Mariners. In my freshman and sophomore year, we built a 42-foot ketch as part of a school project in a shop, and we all had some part in it. We built it as the Spalding Dunbar design from Chatham, so that we could sail it in shallow water. Had a centerboard, so Pleasant Bay wasn't a problem for us. Kids went to the junkyard and got dome lights out of cars, and that became the lights above the bunks that we built in the bed. The automotive class rebuilt a marine engine. Some of us in woodworking made the shapes, like the chain plates where the lines came down and attached to the ship. Made that out of wood, and then we took it to a foundry in Howard, and they poured the brass fittings for us.
What
and
was the name?
It was a town project. The town kicked in, the different clubs donated money if we needed something to buy a part of it.
What?
And I was in on that, and then my junior year, we launched it down at Rock Harbor. I was on board, we rolled it in, set the mast, and then we sailed up through the canal, around Woods Hole, out to Nantucket, and then eventually came back into Pleasant Bay. But we came in via Stage Harbor, because in those days, Morris Island was really an island, and you could sail around it into Pleasant Bay. Now that's all filled in. You can't do that, as things have changed.
Wow.
And then the next summer, we sailed right out of the cove down here, went out and took a left and went to Maine, sailed straight to Bar Harbor, and then came back down the coast. Now, if you can imagine this today with insurance and the way things work, we had one leader, we had 9 kids, we had our radio direction finder and a compass, and we were out at sea. You're about 90 miles off when you go past Boston. And then we got there and we went mountain climbing, up on Cadillac Mountain, swam naked in the pool that's up on top, and came back down the coast out of different harbors. So
how many of you were on the Ketch?
there are about 9, so about 9.
Wow.
Any fog?
It's thick fog. We came in that day into Maine. I mean, we got there about 6 in the morning. We could hear the buoys. We came right in past the buoy, made it to dock, and the people there made arrangements for us to stay.
Oh, right.
And I remember being there, an Italian naval ship came in, and they came ashore, and they were singing O Sole Mio or some song as we came in. So we were all there together, right?
Wow.
So scouting was good. I mean, in order to qualify to go on the trip, you had to pass the piloting test. So you had to learn that, and you had to pass that. But we had minimal navigation equipment. And they used that for many years after that, after I was gone on through college, sailing down to the American Cup races when they were held in Rhode Island, Newport, and other places. So we got a lot of years of experience, and I tell you, you learned something, you felt the experience. When you're there alone at night on deck, you got the tiller, and the wind's blowing and you're sailing along, and the leader's down below, you're all by yourself up there. Yeah,
wow.
That was...
Do you remember who your leaders were?
Sure, Stan Boynton happened to be on that trip, Lon Cochran, and then we had Bernard
Collins?
No. Bernie Collins. Yeah, before he died.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bernie was the prime guy in building the boat. He was in charge of that.
And the name of the Ketch?
SES, the Sea Explorer Ship Nauset.
That's what I thought. I was a Mariner Scout.
Okay, so you and Mrs. Henson.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Hensons put a lot of time and energy into the community and running things for the years they were here.
Oh, they were fantastic.
Son they got from Hungary, in the Hungarian Revolution, he came over here. Yeah, so the teachers were, we had young teachers. Herb Pettengill, that was his first job. He lived up the street. Boynton was there, and Boynton left. He took a 2-year sabbatical and taught down in Adelaide, Australia.
And then came back for us.
And Mon Cochran was our guidance director. He did a great job for me, getting me into school, getting recommendations. I can tell you that. I mean, there was a smoker scheduled up in Boston, which he was taking all the athletes up to be interviewed by different coaches at the motel for scholarships. He told me to come along. I don't know why. I definitely wasn't an athlete. It wasn't going to happen. So we went up. He said, we're going out to dinner with my in-laws. We go out to Brookline, we drive around this big place with rocks and finally into a driveway with a big stone building. And that's where his father-in-law lived. We under the portico, we go in, there's big rugs hanging on the walls. We sat down for dinner, and the guy says to me, that chair next to you is interesting. That was in the room where Napoleon died. So we had our dinner and we left. And 2 weeks later, I get a letter from MIT from Sam Ketchum, as in Dick Tracy, the same name as Dick Tracy name, Sam Ketchum, who is the admissions director at MIT. And he said, we received your letter of recommendation from Mr. Cabot. And however, we only base admission on grades and performance. Somehow I got into MIT, and I'm sure Mr. Cabot was on the board at MIT.
Wow.
So I sure had some influence, but that's what Mon did for it, okay? In town, we had the police department. We mentioned Winnie Knowles, who was my father's cousin, but 15 years older. Winnie was basically the police department. In the summer, he hired some auxiliaries or help. And my father was an auxiliary cop. If they didn't get paid, but if they needed him to do something, they assisted. But when he used to come, he used to park right out here in front, stand out there, and when people came around the corner going too fast, he blew his whistle, they pulled over, stopped, backed up, he gave them a ticket, and off they went. It was his word that they were going too fast, there were no measurements, and it worked. Right? But we also had this corner of the road out here coming around the cemetery. Often at night, that would be people would get sleepy, and they would go straight, and they would crack out here. So we had 3 or 4 accidents, and whenever one happened, my father would bang on the door, I'd come down upstairs. He would pick up the phone and tell Hollis, Jimmy Knowles is an accident out front. hang up. Pauls would take care of the rest. He would call the police. And we'd go running out. I had a lantern with a flashing red light, so I had to go up the corner by the cemetery to make sure warrant cars coming down to slow down people in the road or debris. My father took an axe out in case there was a wire down. He would cut it so it didn't run into it. And we had 2 or 3 out here that way at night that I remember going out for. So that was our job on the auxiliary police.
Were there any police before Winnie
Not,
that you know of?
there was probably that somebody had a job that's called constable. And the constable could serve papers or do something, but not police in the sense of what you think of policing today. I mean, my father was a certified fence measurer or something at some point. Fence viewer, I think they called it, was the official town position. If there's a boundary dispute, you go out to do that. These were all jobs the way they divided them up in town. No pay, they gave you a title, and that was the authority you needed, I guess, to go do something like that. In terms of what we did during those years, in addition to scouting, you know, there was the movies and the bowling and the parties at somebody's house, always, or out on the beach. We went out there and we had beach buggies, so 4-wheel drive, whatever it was in those days to get out. Oh, we had boats. One night we were in the boats, we were out on Pleasant Bay. A storm came up, a hellish lightning storm. We all rushed and we broke into Josh Nickerson's camp and got inside and waited out an hour, went by, and then we locked him at home. And the next day I stopped up to Nickerson Lumber and told them we'd broken the camp. That's what you should have done. Said we're going out to fix the lock and we'll sweep it out again. They said, fine. And that camp today is the one that's located at the Atwood Museum over in Chatham.
Okay.
So a lot of things happened during those out there.
Now you mentioned bowling, so this must have been
At the bowling alley in Orleans.
60s. Couldn't have been 60s.
That was 50s.
50s.
50s. Yeah, early 50s that was there.
Wow.
Right? Yep, that was, I mean, because I remember being a real kid, getting bowling shoes. And Judy's mother bought her a pair of bowling shoes. And she went up there, put them on, threw the first ball and fell flat. The guy said, your mother didn't tell me you were left-handed. You had to stop on the wrong foot. You know how they have a piece of leather, so you have to change the shoes out for that. So those things happen. Well, we also had skating parties. We had a lot of those because we had enough ice in those days to do that. Often it was on a cranberry bog, because a flooded bog, if it fell in, it was only up knee deep. And you know, it froze early, pretty good. But others, some shallow ponds. Hunting was a deal. When I was 12 years old, I got my .22. When I was 14, I got my first shotgun. Simply had to take a 1-hour course one night at the police department. You could walk to the center of town with a shotgun over your shoulder, nobody cared. Often we went hunting in the morning, went to school, the guns were in the car, nobody cared. People went fishing in the morning and came fishing. And it was no big deal. So, still today, you know, they have a conniption fit, but yeah, it went on for a long time. We talked about restaurants. I said I worked in one. But one thing to remember was that Eastham was a dry town. You know, you couldn't buy liquor here or drink it in a restaurant. You had to go to Orleans for that. Nobody seemed to have a problem.
That was until 61 or 62. Eastham was the last dry town on the Cape.
Okay. Well, my first drink bought in a restaurant was when I was 14. We were on a honor society trip to Boston. And so we visited the museums, other things, and we're told we're on our own, go out to eat lunch. So I picked out Jake Worth's on Stewart Street in Boston. I went in there with 2 girls, sat down, and those waiters, they had the long white aprons that went down to the toes, right, and they shuffled their feet. They'd been there for years. What do you want? What do you want to drink? I'll have a beer. Okay. Have a dark beer. Boom. 14 years old, served with no problem. Off we went.
Was there a law at the time?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because when I went to college, we had a local tavern.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my fraternity brothers was bartending. And there was another fraternity brother with his wife. They had married in their junior year. And they weren't 18 yet. The cops came in and they carded the two people drinking. And so they said, well, you got a big problem. So they go to the bartender, say, give us yours. He was younger. And they said, now we're in real trouble. They just left. They said, the bartender being underage wasn't something they could handle.
Yeah.
So we had it. And I remember, I was young. I remember having a party at the fraternity house. We were rolling a keg of beer down the street, and the cop would just simply stop the traffic for us to cross the street and never ask any directions.
Do you have any final thoughts about growing up in Eastham? I mean, you have such wonderful memories, Jim.
Well, we had good times here. I just remember how it was a small town, and things happened. If I went out here and was walking to Orleans, a car would stop and say, you Daddy Knowles' son? I said, yeah, hop in. And you would get in the car and take off. No questions about anything. That small town has gone away. And then have come the trees and a whole lot of new roads. So you can't see things like you used to. I mean, we had the ball field that got replaced by the church parking lot in Eastham. So I remember going to the ball games, and they were all local guys, local workers. And then it wasn't until late in the 60s that it became more college.
Right.
One thing I want to mention is the climate. Everybody here is concerned about climate change, right? As I mentioned before, the old timers, nobody built on the bluffs overlooking the ocean.
Right.
They all stayed away from it. When I was less than 10, I was down surf casting with my father off with the Coast Guard. And coming up out of the water was a pipe about 6 foot tall. And I asked him what it was. He says, that's the well for the old station when he was a kid. And I bet you, we've lost nearly 200 feet inland from now. In my lifetime, probably a football field. Yep. You think of the old things that went away. So we've had a lot of climate change. Some of it's good, some of it causes the openings from the ocean to come in. If you go to Chatham, you'll see we had no opening back until before '85. And you had to come way around Monomoy Point to get in. The water was murky, dark, great crabbing. Got lots of crabs. The new opening came, the crabs left, lobsters came in. It was colder, and it cleared. So those things happened. My father remembers when the cut broke through here in Eastham. Now it's getting down towards the Coast Guard station. It was down there, and then a cut broke through up on the Orleans end. The one down in Eastham closed, and the Orleans end and has moved down. Yeah. So it's in a cycle. You can take within 20 years, it'll probably repeat that whole process. So we've had a lot of it. In terms of warming, when I was a kid, we had ice boats on the Cove, Pleasant Bay. They all froze, and we had many ice boat clubs. You could sail all the way to Hopkins Island in a regular winter. For a tough winter, you could go around Hopkins Island. But the currents kept it open there. Right. So those things don't happen at all anymore. Yeah. So you've got that difference going on. But, you know, the Cape used to be, what, 3 miles out that way? 6,000 years ago, and it just keeps coming. Yeah. That's climate change, it's like an erosion.
It's changing.
How about the train?
The train. Well, I remember it went to Wellfleet, and then when it stopped going to Wellfleet, I remember that. The train tracks used to be the way we'd walk home from Orleans. Well, the Turners, they'd walk all the way down past the windmill,
Mhm.
on the tracks. So, in Orleans, in the Derek Nickerson lumber, there used to be a huge trestle across by Snow's in which they put the coal cars out of and then could dump them down in there. Remember that? I remember moving trains, at the lumber yard. You'd be unloading one, it'd be empty. You used a truck to get on the edge of it. You could push it down the track to move it and get the next one up in place to do that. So, yeah, I remember the trains. And
Yeah.
then they stopped and got replaced by the trucks
Yep.
and became a bike trail.
Again, I just thank you so much for
Okay.
this morning. It's been a wonderful trip down memory lane for me, I'm sure for Rick too.
Well, hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, I've enjoyed thinking back and gathering up all these things
Yes,
you did, right?
yes.
And all the things you did.
Well, thank you so much.
You're
and
quite
we
welcome.
Really appreciate